The virtuous cycle of collaborative DIY. The virtuous cycle of collaborative DIY, this is what I would like to share with you today from my experience. In 2010, I opened an architectural studio in Singapore, Virtuous. A few months later, my business partner opened the same studio in Paris, Pauline Gaudry. So this is me, I'm very tall. This is her, she's very short. But we do have a successful collaboration. So I was, at that time, an entrepreneur. So this is my studio in Singapore. So I was young, I was free, restless, and ready to build the world of tomorrow as an architect. This is what I studied for during 8 years, to be an architect. But to survive, I had to adapt myself. And then I became, ready? An interior designer, a retail specialist, a furniture designer, a wayfinding specialist, a graphic designer, a booth designer, an event maker, a lighting artist, an installation artist, an exhibition designer, a curator, an interactive programmer, an adaptive reuse specialist, a conservation specialist, an airport consultant, an urban planner, urban designer, landscape architect, infrastructure designer, research and development, tropical sustainable architect, an adjunct teacher, visiting guest lecturer, a conference moderator. All of that. Thank you. All of that in 5 years. 5 years. Yesterday was the 5th year's anniversary of Virtuous. We are 10 times younger than Singapore, but all of that in 5 years with the great support of my team. So that was my team in 2013. Now we have expanded a little bit more. And what I wanted to share with you is this DIY process. Do it yourself. I just show you what I did during 5 years, and it was pretty much based on this DIY process. So how to do a DIY process? Quite simple. Observe, replicate, and interpret. I found this out when I worked on Leonardo da Vinci. You know this lady, Mona Lisa. And so we worked on the legacy of Leonardo da Vinci in the 21st century. So Leonardo was exploring various fields of expertise: mathematics, fine arts, architecture, technology, and natural sciences. And all of his life, he has been exploring constantly all of those fields and mixing them together. So what can we learn from him? What is his legacy? Observe, replicate, interpret. Scientia, arte, fantasia. And all of his creative process was always the same. Observing and replicating, interpreting and applying. When he was looking at a flower dropping down, he was seeing a parachute. So this is what we learned from him, and that's what we explored, to combine whatever we could see in the nature and how we can replicate it by a man-made. So we looked at the fractal, that in the nature it is expanding. The man-made fractal is usually dividing. And so we applied this process in this art installation that we did a few months ago in the Art Science Museum. And so here, at the same time, you could see the man-made fractal and the nature-made fractal with a 3-dimensional snowflake. And once I was there, and there were a visitor, and so she was telling me, but I don't see any snowflake. And I told her, but you don't need to see a snowflake, because it is for you to start the same process, this DIY process of observing, replicating, interpreting. So that's what we did for this legacy of Leonardo da Vinci in the 21st century. So along that line of DIY process, what we explored even further, it is where everything connects. We are all connected, but there is a slight nuance between being all connected and everything connects. So we had this great chance of working on an exhibition designed for Charles and Ray Eames. I'm sure that you know this chair, famous chair, designed by this most famous furniture designer of the 20th century, but they were much more than that. They were film director, architect, collector, exhibition designer, furniture designer, photographer, and so on, because they believe that everything connects. And in that diagram of Charles Eames, he was explaining the creative process, that it is a non-linear process, that everything goes back to each other and continue in exploring further disciplines. So that's pretty much this creative process, that along a certain development, you have some pocket of development and you go back to the main development. So here we could exhibit one of the most iconic chair, this armchair designed by Charles and Ray Eames, where you can see that every single piece is very little and very essential, and that ensure the timelessness of this piece. And they even did an exhibition design that they curated as well, an exhibition that was brought to Singapore for the very first time. And that, yes, because beyond doing furniture, they were also making exhibition. And even that, this house of cards, because they believe that a toy can be extremely simple. You give a cardboard to a kid, and he can build up something with it. So they developed that, and we built up that giant house of cards, and the kids were crazy with it, and they wanted to replicate it. Remember? Observe, replicate, interpret. And along that line, we try to recreate the atmosphere of the Charles and Ray Eames house. So we did not copy-paste, but we recreated the atmosphere. And obviously those two people, they seem to be enjoying where they are. So the climax of this exhibition was to discover almost 30 years in a flash, 30 years of creativity through all of the furniture that they did in just one flash in this gallery. So continuing again along this journey of making something ourselves, this DIY process. So we believe in something more generous and less anonymous. So we are a young company, we are quite small, and we were invited by Surbana. Surbana is one of the biggest architecture firm in Singapore to join that project, which is Project 2050. What is the future of our Asian metropolises in 30 years ahead from now? And this process, that is pretty much DIY, was basically inviting urban planner, urban designers, architects, infrastructure, engineers, and all together we were designing that piece of a metropolis. And so here the game was radically different than what it is usually for an architect, where basically an urban planner gives you a plot with rules and regulation and you have to follow. This was radically different, where basically we were generating all of us together in this collaborative process, rules and regulation for the future. We don't know what will be happening in 35 years from now, but we're trying to foresee that. So that is the result, this 2 kilometers by 1 kilometer. We had this red plot right in the center. So that is the result of months of development between all of us. This canvas on which we added many towers, high density, the future, overpopulated cities. And here you can see all of our dreams. And this is not a utopia. This can happen. So how to ensure that the cities of tomorrow are livable? So we developed a piece of a city that is, yes, livable and that is sustainable. That's what we developed with our piece of architecture, following the main sun orientation, following the prevailing wind to ensure natural ventilation that can penetrate inside the building. So this is passive architecture. And so all in between those naturally ventilated spaces, we can have public facilities where people can meet each other again, that can be just together. So it is, yes, more generous and less anonymous. We developed that piece of architecture almost like a vertical village where each block can be clearly identified and that can evolve in different ways. So we are in 2050, we can connect easily to our neighbors at different levels, which is whatever we are starting to do now in Singapore. And so that is the result. Those tropical pyramids where basically we are more generous for the people. So all of that was until I did my very first TEDx. That was a few months ago. And this TEDx was an entire eye-opener for me. I had to sit down one whole day, like you, to listen to people, to listen to their experiences and whatever they had to say. And that was for me very difficult. Like, had to stop working for one day, because I work 7 days a week. Had to stop working for one day, but I did it, and it changed completely my way of thinking. So from an individual-centric office, I generated this collaborative-centric office. All of my staff, they were collaborating with people outside of the office, but I realized they were no longer collaborating with each other. What I was promoting outside during my TEDx as well, I wasn't doing it for my staff. And that is what I realized during that TEDx that I was participating one whole day. And so this collaborative DIY, we started to apply that to a project, to offer a toolbox for everyone's use. We were working on a project in Germany, which is a city in former East Germany that has no money, they are bankrupt, there is a high level of jobless people, no one wants to live there, so how to design an urban environment for people with no money, with nothing. So we started to work on a temporary architecture, permanent architecture, to challenge that, to start giving all of that for the people. What is the software, what is the hardware, and all of that could be created with all of my team because they were starting to collaborate with each other. And so following this, we set up all of those tools where basically someone can come with its beer crate and build up a wall with it, or with some palette and do a puppet theater, or even some cardboard roll, and to have a playground for kids. So it's to be, yes, DIY, to do it yourself. So not only us designers, but everyone can do it. Everyone can do it for himself or for herself or for the communities. So we started to plant seeds 2017, 2023, 2030 and beyond based on what people can do simply and to ask them to interact with each other and to not look at this urban development as one direction, but multiple directions. So here you can do this game of 7 differences, like from one side to another. What are the differences? So basically it is what people can do using this toolbox, and that you can have, yes, container that you can start to stack onto each other, and that can become, yes, a building, or even starting again doing architecture using wood and no longer concrete or steel. So this is what we can have in 2017, just using those palettes and beer crates and so on. And a few years later, it can become a true public space as well. So that's the vision in 2030. I believe that from a DIY process, which is element A, B, C, with this highlight moment, this eureka moment, and after continuing onto application, evolution, and adaptation, we can go from this DIY process to this virtuous cycle of collaborative DIY, where basically everything merges, everything mixes. And from one element to another, you have multiple highlight moments, multiple application and evolution, where, again, everything connects. Thank you.